Hello, and this is my first video I've ever done, and at least on paganism. I've done a couple of videos on video games, but today I'm going to do one about Lilith, and I'm going to explain to you the historical origins of this person, or this spirit. I'm sure that a lot of you have read that Lilith is a goddess or Sumerian goddess of mother and children, and that the evil patriarchal Jews came over and demonized the goddess Lilith, or some bullshit that has to do with patriarchy and something to do with men, which actually sounds more sexist when you put it in the context of some books. And you probably read those in books like, Barbara Black's Book of Lilith, I believe it's called, and a couple of, it's just retorted, and they keep doing that over and over in New Age. Well, I don't like it, because if anybody's ever done the research, or anybody has ever actually knows anything about Mesopotamia, you will not find Lilith in anything. Like, for example, if there's a list of gods and who they're related to, because they're all related, you will not find her on there. And I have seen a couple New Age sources say Lilith is older than Inanna, and you get sources like that. Well, that's also not true. So I'm going to present something, and I'm going to try to explain it the best I can, and I'm going to use visual aids. So let's go to the start of it. The first time that anything close to Lilith is ever mentioned in history that we know of, there could have been something earlier, is with the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that's a pretty famous story. But she seems to play a very minor role. There's a tree, and there's a snake at its roots if you use the incantations, you can't use them on the snake. It doesn't work. So basically, as far as magic is concerned, you can't get rid of it. And then Lilith made her home in the middle, and then an Anzu bird, or a zoo bird, made its home at the top of the tree. Okay, so we got that. Well, Inanna wants to make a throne with this tree. But all these things nesting in it conflict with that. And in some translations, you'll see that it says ghost in place of Lilith. And there's different versions of Gilgamesh where the word for Lilith, which is Kiskililake, I believe it's pronounced, I really don't know, is not present. And there's stories where it's just a spirit. So Inanna tries to get the gods, she begs the gods for help, and none of them are going to help her. She finally gets the help of Gilgamesh, and he drives them all out of the tree with his axe. And Lilith flees into the wilderness, where she's said to dwell today. That's pretty much the first part. And it seems, based on textual evidence, and I think the correct translation was actually Maiden of Lila, but I'm not completely sure. At least Schwartz goes into it more in the book, Lilith the First Eve. And it seems that there's this being named Lilith, who's an incubus, a dream demon who comes to women and copulates with them in their sleep, comes to them in their dreams. He seems to be the first mentioned on the Sumerian king's list. That's close to the Lilith demon. And then, of course, it evolved into the Lilith demon. And so you got these two demons that, in Mesopotamian demonology, that are incubi and succubi, respectively. You have Lilith, and then you have his female counterpart, Lilith. But Lilith, he never really got he didn't get as famous as Lilith did. Nobody really remembers him that much. And I couldn't tell you what happens to him. It's just like his myths completely drop dead. Then there's some corresponding demons, Ardot Lily and Ardu Lily, which are just basically, I think, Akkadian counterparts to Lulu and Lily too. So you got that. And they were originally storm demons, which, if you do some research on the etymology of the word Lil, and Lilith's name, the Lily two demons, the ghosts, It means ghost spirit, but it's also the word for breath and wind. So there's two deities in Sumerian lore, Enlil and Ninlil, who have the word Lil in them, but frankly they're unrelated to Lilith other than having the word Lil in them. So you got that, and it seems like over progression, over time, the Lilith myths start taking on more sexual characteristics. And when they take on more characteristics, a lot of it's very similar to Inanna. And, Ishtar is a very famous Babylonian goddess of love, sex, war. Well, she's also famous temple prostitution and stuff like that. It's interesting to note that in Mesopotamian demonology, demons oftentimes serve the gods. So when they were sent to do harm, they were sent to do harm on people by the gods sometimes. Lamashtu is one of the only demons, in fact probably the only one who did evil on her own accord. So they have their own orders. They probably act on their own accord too. I mean, they have to enjoy their job. They couldn't. I mean, why wouldn't you? So we got that squared away. So Lilith takes on a lot more sexual attributes, and it comes from the goddess Ishtar in her Ki Lili form. And in this form, her epithet is Divine Lady Owl. And she leads men astray, and she goes out into the night, and she's basically, what she is, a prostitute. And she seduces men. Well, since Lily 2 is connected with owls, because Lily 2 wasn't just the name for Lilith. It was the name for owl spirit women. Like, they had the owl feet and the owl wings, and they went out into the night and harmed men and children and women. And then you had Lilith, who was described the same way physically, and she's always described as a beautiful woman and a maiden. And then you had then you had some other things like I just lost my train of thought there. Well, you had Lilith, and then you had the Lily 2 demons, and then that's pretty much all. Oh, the word owl. The word owl was similar to Lily 2, and sometimes the word Lily 2 referred to owls were thought to dwell in the wilderness and haunt graveyards, just like Lily 2 demons did. So you get that kind of confusion there. Well, and then on top of that, you have Inanna, Ishtar, is being called Divine Lady Owl. So it's pretty good to say that over the evolution of myths, shared characteristics with Lilith begin to appear. And they appear quite rapidly. Lilith is described as, in Babylonian text, as being an infertile maiden with no milk in her breasts. And she can't have children. In fact, I think it was later on R.Lily did develop the ability to have spirit children or whatever with her midnight copulations. But at this time, she was just mostly sexual. And it calls her a prostitute. And it describes her in a similar way as Divine Lady Owl. But it says Ishtar sends her out to lead men astray. Whatever that is, other than sex, I could not tell you. So it reminds me of the Bible when I read it, because it's very similar in biblical texts, the way that they speak in Mesopotamian texts. So you have that aspect of Lilith starts developing. Well, there's another aspect of Lilith that starts developing that doesn't have to do with Ishtar. It has to do with another goddess named Lamashtu. For the sake of argument, Lamashtu is probably better akin to a demon, because she was not worshipped by people. And the reason she wasn't worshipped by people is because she loved to go out and kill people's children, and they did not like that. So they had a lot of incantations and stuff against her, just like they did with Lilith. Well, Lilith starts sharing this aspect with Lamashtu. I don't know when exactly it occurred. Lamashtu is a lot older. And Lamashtu, she was special because she was hideous looking. She was said to seduce men, but she was actually a hideous monster, whereas Lilith is a beautiful maiden. And Lamashtu would be driven out by Pazuzu, who was also a demon. He used to cause like storms and famine and stuff, but at the same time, he didn't really like Lamashtu. So if anybody wanted to get rid of Lamashtu from their life, if they thought Lamashtu harmed their children or killed their children, Lamashtu used to be in heaven, and they would pretty much basically bribe Pazuzu to send her back into the underworld. She used to be a being of heaven like the other gods. She got kicked out because of her behavior. I do not know the details of it because the mythology isn't specific, but she got kicked out for it. So, just like other demons, she resides in the underworld. Well, she starts sharing characteristics with Lilith. So you got the development of Lilith. There's two sides of her, the Lamashtu aspect and the Ishtar aspect. And then you have the owls. And owls are associated with prostitution. If you've ever seen the Bernie relief, which is a controversial relief based on Kramer's translation in the beginning, Gilgamesh, where Kisakil-Lalake was Lilith, people believed this to be a relief of Lilith, but over time, with better advances in archaeology and stuff, we have pretty much, I think the argument is pretty much that it's Ishtar. I think we can get around to saying it is. Some say it's Ereshkigal, the goddess of the underworld, but I tend to agree with them because Ereshkigal isn't associated with lions. And this image of Ishtar has the owl bird feet, the predatory bird feet, the wings, a turban that indicates that she's a goddess. She is nude, and she's flanked by owls and lions. And she's standing on top of lions, which is a characteristic of Ishtar. It's not a characteristic of any other god, and it's certainly not something that Lilith is associated with. Besides, the owls are pretty much the only thing she's really associated with. And the owls have to do with the underworld. They symbolize the underworld, and they were connected with evil spirits, and they were also connected with prostitution. So that was all stuff that Lily Two Demons were connected with, and Lilith herself. So you get the progression of that. Most of the New Age stuff, they like to edit that part out, that Lilith was a child killer, because they don't want to acknowledge it. And I will say that based on my readings, she probably started out as a succubus, so she didn't become a child killer until later in history. So I'll give them that. But as far as being worshipped, whenever you see that she's a Sumerian goddess or something, there's nothing to indicate, there's no physical evidence. Whenever we look for, was this being worshipped, you look for evidence that people left behind, incense, offerings, altars, temples, and like, for example, Inanna rules over the city of Ur. A lot of gods ruled over certain cities, and there was a lot of political fiasco in the religion as well. And you get that in other cultures too. Well, there's none of that. Lilith didn't rule over a city. There's no evidence of worship whatsoever. In fact, there's not a lot of evidence there's evidence of demons, but as far as images of demons go, there's not a lot of images of demons. There's a tablet preserved of Lamashtu with Pazuzu at the top, which was probably a tablet used for actually Pazuzu, not Lamashtu. In Sumerian belief and in sympathetic magic and Mesopotamian magic, you would make an image of a demon and then you would destroy it to get rid of said demon. So you're not going to see a lot of images of Lilith until way later in history. So you fast forward. There's a reference in Isaiah 34:14 that may or may not be Lilith. This is a part where a lot of academics disagree. The word is kind of obscure, and it's only a list of things that were the passage is only talking about like arrow-headed snakes and bloody beings dwelling out in the desert, because Lilith dwells out in the wasteland. Pretty much does that. It's not anything of importance. And you get a couple of Talmud references, like her having long black hair, being a seductress. Most of the time you hear about her being a seductress, and the child killing part usually takes a back seat. But it's still there, because most of the artifacts on Lilith are to protect children. They're not to protect men. Even though she's mostly talked about as a dream demon, as a succubus, most artifacts are there to protect newborn children. Okay, so you got this going on, and it pretty much what had happened, based on the archaeology, they had Babylonian incantation bowls against Lilith. and her children, I think. And what had happened was and this was during the time the book of Isaiah was written, the Hebrews got captured by the Babylonians, and during this time a lot of different culture swapping happened, and Lilith came into being there, because the Hebrews used to be the Canaanites, but they were not the Sumerians, Babylonians, Assyrians. They had traded with them, and they got conquered by them, so they get a lot of different things. For example, if you've ever heard of the evil eye in Judaism or Christianity or Islam, that actually comes from Canaanite, not Canaanite beliefs, it comes from Sumerian beliefs. Originated from Sumer, like Lilith did. So you get a lot of that, a little bunch of things mixing and matching. But Lilith was one of the things that people held on to in oral traditions and blah 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 blah. The myth of Lilith doesn't really pick up until European Jews in the medieval period. And if you've ever heard of people citing the alphabet of Ben Sira and saying it's a satire or whatever, but it has a story about Lilith in it. And a lot of scholars believe this is actually based on oral traditions. And if you ever read Lilith's Cave, it goes a little bit into that. And in the book, it's got some of the oral traditions in there concerning Lilith. And the thing about it is, basically, there's this huge time gap and a huge location gap. You got the Hebrews migrating, throughout the Mediterranean and stuff. And this story, the Alphabet of Ben Sira, was written, I think, in German. So the story stayed alive for all that time. And that's about the time she became Adam's first wife. You hear about her as being Adam's first wife. And this myth developed out of the contradiction in Genesis that says that God created men and women, and then in the next passage he says that he created Adam, or the writer says that God created Adam and then Eve. So this was a contradiction. To explain this contradiction, they developed the myth that Lilith had once been Adam's first wife, and she was created at the same time he was, or soon thereafter. And in some versions she was a hermaphrodite, and I believe that's more of like a Jewish mystic version. So this is where the feminist idea comes from, because she refuses to bow to Adam. And when she refuses to bow to Adam during the sex position thing, she gets an argument with him about sex positions in the Garden of Eden. And she refuses to be on bottom because it's the inferior position, and she says that they are both equals, and sometimes she says that they're superiors in different versions, or she's superior in different versions. So she gets mad, she speaks the secret name of God, she teleports out of the Garden of Eden. Adam gets lonely. He asks God for her back, so God sends 3 angels, and Lilith says that she had been by the Red Sea, and in Judaism, demons are attracted to the water, and she had been copulating with various demons, from what I gather. And she said she didn't want to go back to Adam. Pretty much, she didn't have any desire to, and she said she was only created to do harm to babies. And that's where you get the start of her being a child killer. Right? So there's that, and Jewish mysticism elaborates that on more, that she was a hermaphrodite and that Adam was a hermaphrodite, which if they're created in the image of God and God is dual gender, then they're gonna have dual gender too. And it explains away how Adam lost his gender, his hermaphrodite status when Eve was created. But it never explains why Lilith lost her hermaphrodite status. If you want to get technical, maybe you could make the hypothesis it was Lulu. And Lulu and her disappeared in oblivion. I mean, it's completely lost there to me. It just never explained it whenever, in my readings, it never seemed to explain it really well. So at some point she turned into a female. Nobody knows what happened to her male half. So you got that. And Lilith is a seductress, and there's some Zohar myths where she challenges certain biblical characters, and some of them fail and some of them don't. Adam fails. Noah, who used to be a pious man, became a drunkard and failed and sinned with Lilith. And then Moses had won against her, but these people are pretty much mentioned in really short paragraphs, because basically you get the idea in the Zohar that because in Jewish, well, let me cover this because I forgot about this. In Jewish folklore, Lilith married Ashmodai, or Asmodeus as in Latin, who was a demon, who was a very prominent demon. He was like the Jewish version of Satan. And in Zohar, she married Samuel, who was the Satan of the Book of Job. Now, and Samuel has 4 wives. Lilith's just one of them. And you find out there's multiple Liliths, just like there were in Mesopotamia, where you have matron Lilith, which is Lilith of Adam's wife, who got in a fight with her granddaughter or daughter, I'm not completely sure, Lesser Lilith. She got in a fight with her over Ashmodai because the younger one was married to Ashmodai, and Samuel and Ashmodai don't get along. So you got this huge like love triangle, love square, I have no idea, going on. And you know, she at this time she's always mentioned as a succubus of the night, a lady of the night, going out and copulating with men in their dreams and killing children. She's always mentioned doing that. But when she tests these men, it's usually sexual, you know. It's usually her feminine wiles. The curious one, the one where it gets really entertaining that they elaborate on, is Jacob. Because when Jacob was born with Esau, when he was in the womb, and there's different conflicting myths, but there's always opposing angel like Metatron or Michael to Samuel. But throughout the myths, this is consistent. Samuel was the guardian angel of Esau. Metatron or Michael or whoever was the guardian of Jacob. And there was always fighting, and it starts in the womb, according to the text. And it's just a big, bad sibling rivalry that extended to the spiritual side with Samuel and Metatron and Michael or Uriel or whoever. So what happens is Jacob goes through that test, because it's a test of being a biblical patriarch, to pass the test against Lilith and win. And he wins, but Samuel gets pissed off about it. And because Samuel gets pissed off about it, he just completely jumps Jacob and wrestles him. And if you've ever read the Bible about the invisible man wrestling Jacob and that he'll be called Israel and blah 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 blah, that was Samuel doing it out of anger because he passed the test. And he also, according to the text, he also killed Jacob's wife, his favorite wife, because Jacob had broken his promise with God. So you get all this kinds of stuff, you know. You get a lot of these myths together. And that's not even half of it. There's some stories about Lilith and King David and Ashmodai and King David that were really popular in folklore. And she actually had a lot of wisdom to offer King David when he had passed the test with her, which were not sexual or even demonic. They were just weird, bizarre tests. And the Queen of Sheba, during this time, the Queen of Sheba is tagged in with Lilith. In some folklore, not all of it. And for example, I think there was one story where King David had the Queen of Sheba as a guest, and he wanted to see if she was a demon or not, so he had to go through the water, and when she lifted up her skirt so it wouldn't touch the water, she had hairy legs, which according to their custom demons are hairy like Esau, so they would shoot, that was Lilith. So you got a bunch of those stories, and if you ever go into demonology, there's a whole King Solomon, King David thing about demons, and you'll find more out about Lilith there and Ashmodai. So you got that. And then, there's some myths about her being the servant to the matronette, the Shekinah, who is like the female side of God in Jewish mysticism. In Judaism, the Shekinah is the presence of God that's female. But in the Jewish mysticism, it's actual embodiment of the female side of God that's cut off from himself. And in there, Lilith becomes, or she tries to replace the female side of God, and she goes against her maker. She's a handmaiden to the matronate. So she's a handmaiden to the female side of God, and she tries to replace him now, which sounds very similar to the stories about Ishtar and Lilith, but elaborated, where Ishtar's handmaiden was Lilith. So you get that, and Lilith becomes God's wife for a little bit. I think it's more symbolic that she's trying to replace the female side of God, and it was considered like one of the worst parts of Israel history, and blah 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 blah. Well, the Lilith has remained a popular myth, and it's probably going to be popular for a long time when you got things like Lilith Fair. So first, let me start with Romanticism. In the 19th century, the Romantic movement got really big in the artistic sense. And there was a bunch of Romantic artists who would adapt like Greek and Roman mythology and also biblical mythology and put it in there, or any folklore. And Faust had mentioned Lilith and had explained it to his Christian audience, because back then it was a Jewish myth. It wasn't a Christian one. And Lilith might have actually been in Michelangelo's painting, because she was a serpent in the Garden of Eden too, with Samael. And she tries to seduce Eve, and mostly, and copulates with her in a really, like, the passage is really bizarre. And actually, I want to note that one of the most bizarre passages in the entire Lilith fiasco that I've ever read is that she kills children to make a veil for herself. That was so confusing that if you ever read the Hebrew goddess, Patai actually translated it from the Hebrew and could not figure it out either. He had left question marks, like, what is he about? Nobody has figured that passage out. But anyway, I mean, like, how are you going to make your veil out of dead children? and she's also described in Jewish folklore as a cannibal too. She likes to eat, drink the blood and eat the bones, and even the bones off of the mother and the child. So she's not just the first woman or the first hermaphrodite, or whatever you want, whatever applicable title you have, whatever you're drawing your mythology from. And so you get this, and by the time you get to the 19th century, Dante Gabriel Rossetti is the big name in it. He was the one that set Lilith up, and he romanticized Lilith, and he mostly got rid of the attributes of Lilith that were baby killing, and it was mostly she was a femme fatale. She was a seductress, even though she she was a seductress, she also killed people. So he would put things like, I think it's opium, it's in his in the picture with Lady Lilith, and that was to symbolize death, because being with her, meant death, which comes from Jewish lore, which comes from the Jewish mysticism side, but is probably found in Mesopotamia too. So you get this, right? You get that. And he sets that up for feminists. Well, during the second wave movement, the 1970s, you get things like Lilith magazine. A lot of Jewish feminists picked up the Lilith myth. And they don't easily deny the child killing aspects, but the focal point was the Alphabet of Ben Sira, which is a controversial text because some people don't consider it real. But some people might also think that it's based off oral legend, and it definitely seemed real to the people, to the Germans at the time. So you get this, and so basically they push that feminist part. Then the New Age movement picks up Lilith, and this is where it gets fuzzy for a lot of people, because there's a lot of Satanists picked up Lilith. And in the 8th century, if you ever read the Gospel of Aradia, Charles Leland picked up on the Lilith myth in the Italian folklore. Well, it's mixed of biblical and Roman stuff like Diana, and it has Lucifer in it and stuff like that, and it also has Lilith, but I would argue that it wasn't the the Lilith that you guys are looking for. It's not Adam's first wife. It's more of a name for Aradia. So I wouldn't say that it was the one that you're looking for. With the New Age movement, like, Satanism picked her up because, of course, she's the wife of Satan. Let's not even romanticize that. But they started rewriting the myths because a lot of people were so romantic to the point where they couldn't stand the fact that she was a child killer. So you get the blame on the Jews, you get the blame on men or something, where Lilith is the victim, which isn't feminist, by the way. I don't think so. And you get all of this. When you get on the Jewish feminism side of things, it's mostly Lilith is a 21st century woman's perspective. When you get on Lilith in the New Age movement, it's usually that she's the victim of men or something. And this I don't agree with. This is why I have this video, is because there's a lot of people, they hear it, it's repeated so often that a lot of people think it's fact. And it's repeated by books that are not academic, that cannot cite their sources, or their sources say something else when they do cite their sources. And it's repeated so often that people don't even question it. And it's like, if you looked into Sumerian mythology, it's not there. I mean, her being the goddess of women and children, and she harms pregnant women and she kills children, it's not there. I mean, she started out as a demon. There has to be archaeological evidence of her worship. There isn't. And, you know, that doesn't make her less of a deity. Having modern beliefs doesn't make her less of a deity to anybody. And it certainly doesn't make you look stupid or anything. You just need to admit that it's not historical. You don't have to be historically accurate. It's just not, you know, you have a different version of Lilith. You have modern beliefs on Lilith. You can't say the ancient people had the same view, because you're projecting your view on the ancient people, and they didn't have that view of her. And that's why I have this video.